And yesterday we discussed Hezek Shen and Nicker, and today we're going to a very fundamental question, which is Konsinan Shoyi Gatu Mezid. The question basically is, in a scenario where we penalize somebody with Mezid, or in other words, with intention, if he intentionally violates something, he's penalized. Does that penalty apply also if it's done b'shegig, by accident? In other words, is it necessary to discourage people from doing things intentionally to penalize those that do so intentionally? And Gemara, long Gemara, we'll go through it in a moment. The Gemara will identify different factors which might, in other words, even if typically we don't give such a penalty, there might be certain scenarios where we do. Why would we do that? Either maybe there's a difference between deraises and derabanans. Maybe there are certain scenarios where the halachas, the laws are not being kept properly. And therefore, in order to encourage people to keep the laws properly, we penalize even mistakes. And that sort of, in a nutshell, is the main components of the next Gemara. Okay, 1 second. A little less than halfway down. The first one line is v'hocha bekonsu shayigatu mezid kamafidi. So we had a debate between Rabbi Yehudah and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says that in all these scenarios, we both unintentional and intentional are penalized, and Rabbi Yehudah says only intentional. The Gemara says this has to do with the fundamental debate. Rabbi Meir always would say that you penalize unintentional with intentional together. Rabbi Yehudah says you only penalize intentional. Okay, so now we're at V'rami de Rabbi Meir, Ad Rabbi Meir. The first one line is Ad Rabbi Meir. About halfway down the page. V'rami de Rabbi Yehudah, Ad Rabbi Yehudah. We have a question on each opinion. The Tanya we learned. Somebody cooks on Shabbos by mistake, he can eat it. But mezid, if it was intentional, lo yachal, he can't eat it. Div Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. So what do we see very clearly here? Rabbi Meir holds you do not give a penalty, shayigatu mezid. The penalty for cooking on Shabbos is only if you did so with intention. Rabbi Yehudah says, if it was done by accident, you can eat it after Shabbos is over. If it was done intentionally, you can't eat it forever. Rabbi Yehudah clearly gives different penalties between shayig and mezid, but both of them get penalties. For cooking on Shabbos, they cannot eat the food on Shabbos, which is the opposite of what Rabbi Yehudah previously said. Rabbi Yehudah says if you make somebody else's food impure, or you mix their truma and chulin together, and you did it by accident, you're not penalized. There's no penalty for shayig. Okay, Rabbi Yehudah, the third opinion. He holds that b'shayig, the penalty is that other people can eat it after Shabbos, but you can never eat it. The mezid lo yachal lamis, if it's done intentionally, nobody can benefit from it. Lo loiv lo lacherim. Neither him nor anybody else. Okay. Regardless, kasha de Rabbi Meir, kasha de Rabbi Yehudah. We have a contradiction between Rabbi Meir in where somebody mixes truma and chulin together. Rabbi Meir does penalize both shegig and mezid, unintentional with intentional. And on Shabbos, he only penalizes mezid, not shegig. And Rabbi Yehudah is the opposite. When it comes to somebody who mixes chulin and truma, Rabbi Yehudah only penalizes mezid. When it comes to cooking on Shabbos, Rabbi Yehudah penalizes both of them, shegig and mezid, although mezid gets a more severe penalty. So when it's kasher Meir, kasher Rabbi Yehudah. Samar explains. Rabbi Meir like kasha, Rabbi Meir on Rabbi Meir, that's not difficult. Why? Kikanes b'derabanan. The Rabbi Yehudah only gives a penalty by rabbinical prohibitions. With the rights of lykonis. Okay. So in other words, if you think about mixing truma and chulin, effectively what the Gemara is saying is mitam medam menasech. All these things of hezek and nikar, they're really lo shmei hezek. They're not considered a damage. The damage isn't apparent in the item itself; it's not considered damaged. And therefore, because it's only rabbinical in nature, therefore we must require penalty both unintentionally and intentionally, so that people make sure that this does not occur. Whereas by the Raisa, people are more stringent, so there's no need to penalize unintentional with intention. The Raisa, so Gemara says it's not a good answer because of Hamanasach, a guy pours wine for idol worship. The Raisa, it's clearly biblical, it's idol worship. V'kakanas, and he does give a penalty. So Gemara says that's a unique category. Because idol worship is so severe, we penalize even someone who does it by accident. Okay, so in general, Reb Meir holds that penalties of shogeg atu mezid, shogeg and mezid together, are done by d'Rabbanan, not by d'Oraisa. And that's why somebody cooks on Shabbos, b'shogeg, he's allowed to eat the food immediately. Because it's d'Oraisa, it's biblical. However, if it's d'Rabbanan, then we say that we penalize shogeg atu mezid. Unintentional with intentional, mistake with intention. Mixing chulin and truma is not d'Oraisa. Menasach is d'Oraisa, it's the same category. Gemara says Menasach is an exception because idol worship is different. Okay, so now Rabbi Yehudah kasha. Rabbi Yehudah is contradictory. Why? Rabbi Yehudah says by Matama Medama Menasach, the mission of Hezek She'en Nikar. What does Rabbi Yehudah say? Shogeg no penalty, mezid there is a penalty, exactly what our mission says. However, when it comes to the laws of Shabbos, Rabbi Yehudah gives a penalty for shogeg as well, even if it's less severe than mezid, but there's still a penalty. So it says loikash, he loikanes b'd'Rabbanan, b'd'Oraisa kanes. Rabbi Yehudah only gives a penalty by d'Oraisa, by biblical. By rabbinical concerns, he does not penalize. The opposite of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir penalizes Rabbi Meir gives strict penalties for mistakes by the Rabbanans, not by the Raisas, except for Rabbi Zara. Rabbi Yehudah is exactly the opposite. Strict penalties are given for Shabbos, violation of a deraisa. But for violations of Rabbanon, penalties aren't as strict. What about the fact? Okay, so that's why Hezek She'en Nikar Loshmei Hezek. That's why Metama Medama Menasach, making something tummy, mixing Kollel and Truma, and pouring wine for idol worship. Well, hold on a second. The first two are the Rabbanans, the rabbinical, because Hezek She'en Nikar is not considered a damage. But the third one, Menasach, that's deraisa. Pouring wine for idol worship is deraisa. So why does Rabbi Yehudah exempt you from penalty if it's done by accident, with a mistake? Gemara says to the contrary, because idol worship is so severe, there's no need to penalize mistakes because nobody makes mistakes. People stay far away. It's the opposite of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says because it's so strict, we have to give you a penalty. Yehudah says no, because it's so strict, there's no need to give you a penalty. Okay, another question. We're still not satisfied. Again, Rabbi Meir says Rabbanons, we give a penalty of mistakes. For deraisas, there's no penalty, except for idol worship. That's different. About 3/4 of the way down, first word in line is V'romi de Rabbi Meir.
You're on page 52B.
53b.
53B. And the first word in line is
V'romi.
V'romi de Rabbi?
V'romi de Rabbi Meir, yes, correct. Okay, just to bring you up to speed for a moment, we had a machlokes for Meir and Rabbi Yehudah with regard to Hezek She'en Nikar. I'm sure you're familiar with that from yesterday.
Okay, what?
Hezek She'en Nikar, damage that isn't apparent. Okay. 3 classical examples are metame, medama, and menasach. Metame means making something tame. Medama means mixing chulin and truma, and menasach is pouring wine for idol worship. Metame, medama, and menasach are all in the category called Hezek She'en Nikar. The damage of these things is not apparent on the item itself. When you crash into a car, you could see the car is damaged, right? But when somebody, what's it called? Somebody makes something tummy, there's no difference. The item looks identical. Now, Rabbi Meir actually disagrees with the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehudah agrees with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says if it's done by mistake, then you're exempt. Intentionally, you're obligated to pay. Rabbi Meir disagrees with the Mishnah and says both with intention and mistake, you're both obligated to pay. The Gemara explains the reasoning is because not because he says Hezek She'en Nikar is called a damage, but because he says Kansinan Shogeg Atu Mezid. We penalize both Shogeg and Mezid. Unintentional with mistake with intention. They're put in the same category. And in general, the Gemara points us to a fundamental debate with it, which is whenever we penalize mazid, intention, do we also penalize mistakes together? Okay, so without you'll see the Gemara we saw earlier, but very briefly, the Gemara's resolution now is, in Rameir's opinion, all rabbinical points in a rabbinical question, shayig and mazid are treated the same. Both are penalized. By biblical laws, only mazid is penalized, not shayig, except for Rabbi Dovid, which is very strict. And the opposite is true of Rabbi Yehudah. Rabbi Yehudah says only by the eraisas do we penalize shayig and mazid, but Rabbanans we do not, except for Rabbi Dovid, which we don't penalize because it's so strict. Nobody will violate the laws of Rabbi Dovid. Okay. So let's ask a question on Rameir in a question of deraisa. The Tanya we learned. Somebody who plants a tree on Shabbos, if it does so b'shagig by accident, Yikayim, you can keep it. If it's done b'mezid, Ya'akar, he should pull it out. Ub'shvias, let's say he planted on Shemitah, which is a violation of the laws of Shemitah. Bein b'shagig, bein b'mezid, Ya'akar. Divrei Rameir. Rameir says on Shemitah, whether it was done with intention or without intention, you should uproot it. Rabbi Yehudah says, b'shvias b'shagig Yikayim, b'mezid, Ya'akar. On Shemitah, what's the rule? B'shayid Yikayim, if it's done by accident, you keep it. B'mezid Yakar, b'mezid, you should take it out. B'Shabbos, b'mezid b'shayid b'mezid Yakar, and on Shabbos, both shayid and mezid should uproot it. Okay, so now we have a question here: contradiction to Rameir and Rabbi Yehudah. The laws of Shemitah and Shabbos are both d'oraisas. According to Rameir, by Shemitah, we are. According to Rameir, the Araisa, we do not penalize Shayg and Mezid, except that Shemitah is obviously an exception here. And according to Rabbi Yehudah, by the Araisa, we do penalize, except that Shemitah is obviously an exception. The question is why. Okay, so the Gemara says, well, the Bryce itself is sort of contradictory, because the Bryce brings examples of two Araisas. In Rameir, Shabbos and Shemitah, and according to Rameir, Shabbos does get the penalty. I'm sorry, Shabbos is exempt. Mistake is exempt from penalty. Shvius, Shemitah, it is penalized. And according to Rabbi Yehudah, it's the opposite. So Shabbos is penalized and Shemitah is not penalized. So what's the difference? Elahasim the time, but the reason over there is something else entirely. Amar Meir, Neimani Yom b'Shabbos b'Shagi Kaim b'Mezid Yakar, b'Shvius Bein b'Shagi Bein b'Mezid Yakar. In other words, Shabbos for Meir does not penalize Shagig. And we're saying that is with standing with Rameir's traditional opinion, which is that an Adiraisa we do not penalize Shagig. That makes a lot of sense. So why by Shemitah do we? The answer is okay, what does this mean? When you want to count how old a tree is, so it's counted in years, and the minimum requirement for a year is 30 days. So if you plant a tree 30 days before Shemitah, then it's considered a tree, and on Shemitah it's treated like it's as if it's a tree. You plant it less than 30 days, then it's not even considered a tree, and it's not considered a tree on Shemitah. What's the difference whether or not it's considered like a tree? So the general rule is that to prevent significant damages, certain minimal types of work is permitted. If you planted it less than 30 days, 29 days, you wouldn't be allowed to do those types of work. Okay, now, because we count by year and not by day, so what's going to happen is that people are going to, so this new tree is going to bear fruit whenever, but the first 3-4 years won't be able to eat. You can't eat the fruit the first 3 years because of Arla. The 4th year, the fruit has to be eaten in Jerusalem. So it comes 4 years after Shemitah, and the guy's eating his fruit in Jerusalem. They say, what type of fruit is this? They say, I planted it on Shemitah, or it's obvious that he planted it on Shemitah. So therefore, we require him to uproot the tree.
And the Shemitah is from Rosh Hashanah, right?
Correct.
And the tree is from Tu B'Shvat.
With regard to the laws of Arla, but with regard to the laws of Shemitah, it would be Rosh Hashanah as well. Okay. Okay, so basically the point here is we don't want people remembering that this tree was planted on Shemitah. On Shabbos, so it's just one day. Nobody's going to remember that it was planted on Shabbos. Davar Acher, another possibility. Next to Yisrael, Shvius, next to Allah Shabbos. People stopped being strict about the laws of Shemitah, and therefore it was necessary to require rabbinically a penalty for people who make mistakes and plant on Shemitah. My Davar Acher, what's the need for a second interpretation? Hachi Gomer. This is what he means to say. Okay, so what does this mean? It might happen that the 30th day is Shabbos, meaning the tree was planted exactly 30 days before Shoshana, which means it must have been planted on Shabbos. So when somebody brings Kerem Revai and he recognizes a tree that still looks very young, he'll realize the tree was planted on Shabbos. So it is sort of possible that in some scenarios actually could be determined that the tree was planted on Shabbos. So therefore, the second explanation comes into play. Tashma Davar Acher, therefore, he has to bring a second explanation. Next to Yisrael al Shvius, next to al Shabbos. People are not so stringent with the laws of Shemitah, but they are careful with the laws of Shabbos. Okay. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehudah. One second. Rabbi Yehudah like Kasha. Rabbi Yehudah is not difficult. But answer Rabbi Yehudah Chamir lehu Shvius. In the town of Rabbi Yehudah, Shemitah was very strict, and nobody violated Shemitah. How do we know it was very strict? Because it was the following story. There was a guy who was trying to name call his friend to embarrass him. So he called his friend a convert, the son of a convert. What happened? What did his friend call back? He said to him, so his friend that was the convert, he retorted to him back. He says, I don't eat Shemitah fruit like you. In other words, and obviously that was an insult, because it was so common that everyone was strict with Shemitah, that to say that somebody wasn't strict with Shemitah was an insult. Because if nobody kept the laws of Shemitah, then he's like everybody else, sort of. So obviously there's a difference between the town of Yehudah and the town of Rameir. Toshma. Let's continue. Okay. Hold on a second. Third of the way down on 54a. First one line is Achal Truma Tmeya. Just give me a moment here. Okay. Let's give a little bit of background here. The general rule is as follows: if somebody eats truma, he has to pay back chulin, and that turns into truma. It's treated like truma. Okay. If a non-kayan eats truma, that's tamei. Mishalim chulin taharin, he pays back chulin, that is tahar. Shilam chulin tmeim, let's say he pays back chulin that's tamei. Mahu, what's the story? Amar Simchas Mishum Rameir. Simcha says the name of Rameir. If he paid back by accident, in other words, he didn't realize it was tamei, tashlum of tashlumin, then the payment is valid. The mezid, but if it was done intentionally, ain't tashlum of tashlumin. The penalty is not the payment is not valid. You have to give a new payment. The rabbi say tashlum of tashlumin. In both cases, the payment is valid, and you have to pay again chulun tahar, so that you shouldn't be gaining from this mistake. The Gemara asks, "B'mezid am I ain't tashlumin tashlumin? Tashlum of tashlumin. Tavi ala bracha to achim emid lechazi meitamasa. K'mashal emid lechazi meitamasa." If the guy ate truma that's tamei, and intentionally he pays back chulin that's tamei, non-truma. What exactly is the problem here? He ate something that's tamei. He's paying back something that's tamei. I'm sorry. 1 second. He's paying back something that's tamei, but that thing that's tamei actually has use, because you could eat it. You could eat it when you're tamei. Unlike truma that's tamei, it cannot be eaten when truma that's tamei cannot be eaten. Period. You can burn it, or you can give it to your animals. 1 second. V'amarava. So Rav explained the brayso. So Amrilan, some say it was kadid with somebody else. Chasura mechser, words were missing. This is the correct way to understand the brayso. Okay. Ochal truma tmeya mishalim koldu. If somebody eats truma tmeya, so the value of truma tmeya is very little. It's either animal feed or firewood. That's the value effectively. So what does he pay back? Koldu, a tiny amount. Okay, now what happens if it was achal truma tahara? He ate truma that was tahar, was consumable. Mishalim chulin tahara, and he has to pay back chulin that is tahar. What happens if when he ate truma that was tahar, he pays back chulin that is tamei? So there is a debate. Simcha said mishum rameir b'shayik tashlum tashlumin. The mezid ain't tashlum tashlumin. Simcha says that according to Rameir, if you pay back b'shayig, then the payment is valid. Pay back b'mezid, it's not valid. You have to make a pay back again. The rabbis say the rabbis say in both scenarios the payment is valid. The chayzer mishalam chulin tahar, and you go back and you pay chulin that is tahar. And Rav Acha says in the name of Rav Acha, the son of Ravika says, the question here is if you penalize shayig atumezid. 1 second. So Rav Acha, son of Ravika, says over here the question is in other words, do we penalize shagig together with mezid? Rameir says there's no penalty of shagig against mezid, and the rabbis say there is a penalty. Now, this is sort of rabbinical. This is not really daraisa, because over here, technically speaking, the payment is valid. You don't have to pay back chulin that's tahar. Torah never says you have to pay back chulin that's tahar. So it should be treated more like rabbinical. And what do we see? And Rameir does not require a penalty for shagig. This is against Rameir's long-standing opinion. Rameir said that you do penalize shagig against mezid. Over here we see we don't penalize shagig against mezid. And this should be, if anything, it should be most analogous toward the Rabbanon, to a rabbinical requirement. Are we together?
So this is the additional contradiction by Rabbi Meir.
Yeah. So Gemara says Hachi Hashta. This is fundamentally different. Why? Because over here is the guy's trying to repent, right? He recognized that he ate truma, and now he's trying to do the right thing by paying back the kain. So therefore it's inappropriate to penalize him. You penalize somebody for violating something. If he made a mistake in how he was supposed to pay back, the guy's trying to do the right thing. It doesn't make sense to penalize him. And we have a few similar types of proofs. Another one, Toshma, Dam Shenitma Vizarku B'Shaygig. You had blood that became tamei, and he sprinkled the blood on the mizbeach by mistake. The halacha is hortza. The sacrifice is complete. It's a valid sacrifice. You don't need to bring a new one. If it was done b'mezid, intentionally, he knew the blood was tamei, he poured it anyway. Lo hortza does not fulfill his obligation. Okay. Now, again, this seems to also be rabbinical. In other words, to have a preference not to sprinkle tamei blood on the altar. And again, over here, we do not penalize shagig. And of course, the resolution is the same thing. There's no comparison here. The guy's bringing a sacrifice. He's trying to do the right thing. Therefore, we're not going to penalize him if the kain accidentally brought the blood when it was tamei. And this is very different than, for example, somebody who is deliberately mixes somebody else's, or even by accident mixes somebody else's chulin with truma, or he wasn't trying to do the right thing. Toshma, next brisa, very similar. Somebody takes with meiser on Shabbos b'shayig by accident, yochel, then he can eat it. 1 second. Okay, so in general, the law is you can't take off the tiles on Shabbos. Meiser cannot be removed on Shabbos. Let's say he did it anyway, b'shayig you could eat it, but meiser you can't eat it. Gemara says hachi hashta. Hasam gavod kunikam chav and anekim leikum v'liknasei. So in other words, this is a violation of it's not a violation of the biblical laws of Shabbos. It's a violation of rabbinical laws. He's trying to take with meiser. He takes with meiser. He violated a rabbinical law of Shabbos. we don't penalize him, we allow him to eat the food. Says Rameir, well, the guy was trying to do the right thing. He was trying to take off Trumas and Ma'aser, and therefore we don't give him a penalty. Tashma, very similar brayso. Hamat b'kelim b'Shabbos. Rabbinically, it's prohibited to take vessels that were purchased from a non-Jew, vessels that were used in the preparation of foods, and to put it in a mikvah, a toivel it on Shabbos. B'shayge, if you did it by accident, yishtamish pen, you're allowed to use it. The maize that it was unintentionally, lo yishtamish pen, you should not use it.
If you really need the utensil.
So the Gemara says, what's the question again? Hasam gavra tuhurim anika mechaben. And Leikum saying the guy was trying to put his things in the mikvah. He's trying to do the right thing, therefore we're not going to penalize him. Okay. So finish with Rabbi Meir, now we switch gears to Rabbi Yehudah. Rabbi Yehudah. So again, Rabbi Yehudah says that what by Durabanan we do not penalize Shaigat or Mezid. Is that so simple? The Tanya we learned. Okay. Familiar, just a brief background here. There is a set of laws pertaining to bittul, nullifying something. The general rule is that things are nullified with 60 times the volume. There is an exception, and that is things that are sort of extremely precious and valuable that are counted in units, in individual units. I don't know how good of an example you have these days. Most things are sold by weight today, not by units.
Well, diamonds.
What?
Well, diamonds.
Diamonds are sold by characteristics, metrics. They're not really sold by units.
Like different kinds of food.
There's sometimes like very exotic fruit can be sold by units. So there's this exotic type of nuts called an egoize perach. I don't know what does our could translate that as.
Orla.
It doesn't tell you what type of nuts. Okay, a certain type of nut called egoize perach. Egoize perach is very expensive nuts, and they are not bottled. They're not nullified. So if you have one nut that is truma that falls into 200 nuts of chulin, it's not bottled. Now, what happens if a guy takes all the nuts and grinds them? So then the law is that they're all bottled, because once these fancy nuts are ground, they're sold by weight.
They're not units.
They lose their unit. They lose their unitary status. Okay. Now, what happens if you ground it intentionally? Let's see. Naflu v'nispatzu. So this very expensive, valuable nut falls in. Echet shayig v'echet mezid lo yalu. Both shayig and mezid, you cannot. It's not bottled. Div Rameir, that's the opinion of Rameir. For Rabbi Yehudah, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, Oimrim, b'shayig yalu v'mezid lo yalu. By shayig, you could say it's bottled, but if it's done intentionally, it is not bottled. Hold on a second. According to Rabbi Yehudah, the Rabbanans, we do not equate shayig and mezid. The rices we do. This is the raisa. This nut is truma. The raisa chad b'trei bottle of Rabbanan hu digazer. I'm sorry. 1 second. I'm sorry. Here, hold on a second. Hold on a second. I apologize here. The first opinion is opinion of Meir and Rabbi Yehudah is that we say we decree shayig, both shayig and mezid. If the guy, in other words, if the guy by mistake ground down the nuts or intentionally, they're still not bottled. Now, this concept that unitary items are not bottled is rabbinical. The midiraisa chad b'trei bottle. Midiraisa would be bottled anyway. It's a rabbinical requirement that we do not allow bittul when we have very expensive single unit items. And v'kakonis Rabbi Yehudah, and Rabbi Yehudah here is giving a penalty. He's penalizing shayig unintentionally together with intentionally. So Gemara says no. The reason of Rabbi Yehudah is the problem here is that if the nuts were cracked, it's very easy to make sort of post hoc justification for why any intentional grinding of the nuts was unintentional. So therefore, this is a unique exception. Even though generally speaking, Rabbi Yehudah says that in a rabbinical context, we do not equate a mistake with intention, but in this rabbinical context, we do, because the difference between intention and a mistake is so small. Every guy who does it intentionally will claim it was a mistake. So therefore, in order to stop people from doing it intentionally, we had to prohibit the unintentional as well. Okay. Fine. So Gemara says, "V'rami Rav Yosi ad Rav Yosi." Okay, Rav Yosi in the previous brisa with these nuts, Rav Yosi says there is a difference between shogeg and mezid, not like Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehudah. Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehudah say there's no difference between intentional and mistake. Rav Yosi says there is a difference. Question on Rav Yosi. The Tanam we learned, "Netiya shel arlo v'shel klai hakaram shenis arva v'netiyas hacheres." He had a small tree that was arlo, or it was klai hakaram. It was a fruit tree. It was a tree that was it was planted in a vineyard, and we lost track of this tree. We don't know where it is now. He shouldn't pick from any tree that might be that original tree. Vimliket, if he picked from it, then yalo be'echad masayim. Then it's bottle 1 in 200. As long as he has no intention to pick the tree. Rabbi Yosi says, even if he had intention to pick the tree, he could still be mevatel it intentionally. In other words, Rabbi Yosi is saying, even if you do this b'mezid intentionally, you're allowed to do this. This contradicts the previous statement of Rabbi Yosi, because Rabbi Yosi says if you took this mixture of nuts with this very expensive variety, then and you smash them all b'mezid intentionally, it's not bottle. Rabbinically, we prohibit it. So why over here do we allow you to pick the tree that might be arlo? It might be prohibited. So Mara says, "Ha'itmar arlo," we learned on this same brisa. Amar Rava says, "Chazaka ein adam oiser es karmi beneti achas." 1 second. The general rule is that nobody would plant an arla tree in middle of an orchard, because there's a tremendous risk, and nobody would want such a thing. So he would clearly mark it. Same thing is true, obviously, in a vineyard. You plant a tree, fruit tree, then you're ruining all the fruits because of climate. So therefore, it's a highly unlikely event, and because it's a highly unlikely event, even if it happened, we don't decree prohibition on it. Thank you. So Rav and Amr. Person is not going to, climb is not. You plant one tree, you're not getting that much. When you do is you prohibit 200 vines, so it's not worth it, and therefore nobody's going to do it. And there's no need for a rabbinical decree. Okay. Next Mishnah. Kahanim shepiglu b'mikdash mezidin chayavin. If you have a kohen that he had an inappropriate intention while bringing the sacrifice, and this makes the animal piggle, it makes it void, and it no longer fulfills the obligation. The halacha is if he didn't b'mezid intentionally, and then chayavin, then he has to pay. Okay. From here onward, I am not very well prepared. We have a few minutes. Let's continue. He was working with somebody else, and they were making something that was tahar. And he says to him, actually turned out that all those, we're making bread together, and the bread was supposed to be tahar, but by mistake it became tummy. He was working with him with sacrifice. It says to him, he was in Jerusalem. They were preparing a barbecue with shlomim, and it says, by the way, it became piggle. The kohen comes and tells him it's piggle. Naaman, he's believed. Let's say he says the harsha sisi imcha b'yom ploinin it mu zvachim shisim imcha b'yom ploinin is paglum ein naaman. Okay, if he declares it tamei while he's working together with him, then he's believed. If he comes the next day and says, by the way, actually yesterday when I brought your sacrifice, I turned it into piggle by mistake, he's not believed. What's the difference? Abaye explains kol shebiyodai naaman. Abaye says the reason is whether or not it's biyodai. Biyodai means that you had the ability to do it. So in other words, when you're working with him and you're making bread together, if you wanted to make it tamei, it's very simple. You just pick up a mouse from the ground, wherever you find one, or some other critter that's one of the 8 shrotzim, 8 types of bugs or whatever, rodents, whatever category, similar category, and you touch the dough and it's tamei. It's that simple, right? Or maybe you take something that's already tamei and your friend is not going to notice because he trusts you. And because you're working with him right now, it's beyond it. In other words, if you wanted to actually make it tamei, you could make it tamei. Therefore, you're believed to say that it's tamei. Same thing is true of the kohen who's bringing the sacrifice. If he wants to make a piggle, he could. And therefore, if he says it's piggle, you believe him. But if he comes the next day where he no longer has the ability to make a piggle, not going to be believed. Okay, that's Abaye's opinion. Let's see Rava. Rava says, in other words, Rava would say that there's scenarios where it could be even without biyadai, even if it's not within his ability to make a pigul, that he would be believed. However, over here is different because the Ashkev v'Amar lev lamidi, he met him and the kohen was silent, didn't say anything. But then he met him the next day and he admitted to him that actually I turned it into pigul. In that case, he's not believed, and that's sort of the debate. So Rava would say that even if it wasn't beyond that he would be believed. Why is he not believed? Because he previously denied it or was silent. Stop there. Have a great day.